Today I'm with Colin Bell from AHA Viticulture. Welcome, Colin, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
So it's early January.
It is.
If you could just talk us a little bit through the season we've had up to date. So,
yeah,
you know, how it's sort of gone, how bud break went, and then the growing season, and then the conditions we had.
Yeah, because it has been a while. So, yeah, it was probably start with winter.
Yep.
It was a tough winter because we had that really hot summer. So vines mostly went into some sort of stress. You know, when people had a lot more water, you saw it less, but where people ran out of water through autumn and then didn't water vines going into dormancy, particularly in Chardonnay, you saw a lot of that trying to establish itself in, and you know, even May I saw some bud burst on some properties. So there was quite a lot of vine stress, which I think has played into, as they came out of dormancy, they weren't happy. And that wasn't every block, and it was probably more coastal where it was more maritime and just didn't achieve a deep dormancy. But it did cause quite a few challenges for a lot of growers, where quite a lot of carb resource was probably used over winter that you would have loved to have been in that sort of bud burst before the roots get going. So there was a bit of a lag with Chardonnay. I think it recovered mostly. I think I think growers spent a fair bit of time on it, and vineyards found ways around it, but it was probably a challenge none of us had seen in a lifetime.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fair call.
Yeah. Cabernet. Well, Cabernet's just Cabernet, and
it's resilient,
didn't seem to notice anything. And in some ways, I've kind of liked what it did, because that little bit of stress in some blocks that have maybe sometimes too vigorous have been quite well behaved this year. Because spring, we got fairly good rainfall in August, which is lovely to set us up. So that was really good. I think then vines came out this year as happy as they could be, considering they went to bed a bit grumpy. Cabernet came out that little bit later again, and I think it was pretty fluid. So I've already seen a bit of colour change in Cabernet. I was even south of Margs this morning, down Redgate area. I saw a bit of colour change down there. So I would almost tend to lean on saying that's a little bit early, rather than a little bit late.
Yeah, but the Chardonnay's probably...
Chardonnay's back.
Yes,
which definitely.
Is, and that's everywhere, up north, south.
That could play out interesting though, because I think last year, you know, we probably ripened Chardonnay in some pretty tough summer conditions. It's kind of nice to get Chardonnay a little bit through the terror of summer and do that last bit of ripening, perhaps it's not going to ever be autumn with Chardonnay, but not in 35 degrees.
If it stays like this, it'll be banging.
It's perfect at the moment. It is starting to soften now, so, you know, as we listen to birds and cicadas in the trees, probably, you know, when I've been going around this week, ag risk-wise, you know, I'm sort of saying to growers, okay, well, if you haven't got any disease, and most places I'm going, powdery's been pretty much under control. I think the preventive programs have worked well. It's now time to shift that focus and say, well, we had a massive blossom through the Marri tree last year. A lot of those trees are still carrying honky nuts. They're not really set up for a big blossom this year. So, yeah, you don't want to say it, but I think it's best to get ready for a fair bit of bird pressure. I think that'd be a fair call. Yeah.
Get your nets out, get ready.
Definitely. So we're concentrating on that quite hard this week. You know, that's a big focus, in trying to find those early blocks and the blocks exposed to creek lines and those sort of things, and saying, oh, it's always been for me with birds, if you can get there before they find it, they're easy to contain. Even if you net once they found it, they know where it is. And they're tenacious little things. They just keep trying to get back to that food source, because they're in a starvation cycle when they start hitting grapes. They don't like grapes as a sugar. They're down on the coast at the moment, I think, because there's quite a good Melaleuca flower down there. That will start to run out of pollen, I'd say, in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Just
when everything's getting really soft.
And you sort of see that focus and they start to move in. And, you know, if there's a good Marri blossom then, you know, they can be distracted by that. I went to a workshop a number of years ago with a BirdLife Australia, and they even went through that Marri wasn't a great food for them either. So as they move from the coast, they're quite happy and they're quite well, nutrition levels quite good. As they move inland looking for food, they are in a death cycle, and their numbers are dropping, because BirdLife Australia, funny enough, didn't really care about our grapes. They cared more about the mortality of silver eyes. So it was a really interesting workshop to go to, because I sat there in the back just trying not to talk. So they were saying, look, as it goes through the season and you get into autumn and that late summer period, they're dying off quite rapidly, and the grapes is a last-ditch desperation to stay alive. So it was a good way of looking at it and saying, well, how can I then, you know, position myself around that as a grower to not lose fruit?
I'll give them a couple of rows. And then,
well, there must be something better than bird nets, because it's a tough activity.
So disease-wise, we've been pretty right. So
I think there's a few growers that have got some powdery, but I think they run programs where it's as lean as possible. So they popped up a little bit, and I think they know how to manage that from where they are. I think if you were fairly preventative, I think it's under control.
And it looks, the canopies too look really vibrant this year.
They look fantastic.
They haven't been beaten up by the sun.
Well, those August,
repeatedly.
September rains too. I think, you know, vines are strong.
Yep.
If they get that late winter rain, they establish well and they provide a bit of shelter.
Yep.
I did do the GDD, so I always log the grow degree.
Yep.
And, you know, after last year, it's really interesting because people, you know, will remember the year afterwards is so different because if you compare 2 years to each other, so everyone's going, it's a cool year, you know, but last year was a heat wave.
Yep.
This year's so I've got 05 to 2025 now on one graph.
Yep.
We're sitting up a middle.
The traditional,
Yeah,
is what I'm kind of calling
look,
it, traditional.
There's something beautiful about average, Mike.
Yeah, that's good. We're there, I reckon. So,
Definitely
yeah.
upper average. So, you know, I think that's really sort of setting up for a really good vintage.
Yep. So the conditions are good. So,
Yep.
And botrytis looks pretty good because we haven't had conditions for it.
Well, we haven't got a lot of sugar yet,
Yes.
so yeah, I think right now we have got no conditions for it and everything's
Yep.
quite baked and hot. We did get a few more rains through flowering and a little bit of drizzle, and some varieties took a fair while to go through flowering. So they're always trigger points for me to think, well, get some good botrytis protection sprays on through that period.
Yep.
Because as those caps are loosening off through flowering, if you are getting little drizzles and things like that, you're getting a little ignition points that might be a problem later. Generally in a season, Mike, I think if it goes dry through the ripening phase, you don't know those ignition points are there because the conditions aren't right.
Yes,
But suddenly if a cyclone moved down or whatever,
we get rain
you
and
got that
bang,
100 mils of rain,
pops
well,
out.
some pressure will be on. But I mean, can't control those things, so float
that's
along
good.
as a grower, see what happens.
So aside from those things, going forward, it'll just be irrigation and then looking after your canopies, doing a trim.
Yep, so I mean, these are sort of trimmed. I'll probably put some nets on this next week.
Yep.
I reckon that's looking pretty good to put the nets on and keep a reasonable amount of water going out. You know, it's veraison time, so this is Savvy Blanc, so it's not quite there, but I'd say next week we'll start to see a few soft berries. So it's always, I always like to give them a little bit of a drink through that period just to make sure that they feel comfortable to produce a crop.
Yep. And then no fertilisation after that.
No,
I'm pretty comfortable.
I'm pretty like, I like to fertilise in spring and let the paddock sort its thing out.
Let it work.
You know, I think it works. You know, it's a mature vine approach.
Yep.
I think a healthy paddock is healthy vines.
Yep.
So yeah, I would encourage, and I'd definitely be cautious of putting on nitrogen sprays in the sense if you do get a rain event and you had quite a young, flushy sort of canopy with young growth, you're going to be more susceptible to get some botrytis in that.
Great. Okay.
Potassium and things like that though, if someone wanted to,
Bit of P.
fantastic, bit of calcium or whatever, but yeah, I tend to leave them alone.
Good.
As much as possible.
Probably I'll just touch on post-harvest
Yeah.
with nutrition. Any recommendations there? So you tend to do a fertigate and then a foliar spray, or?
Yeah, look, in certain blocks I definitely will.
Yep.
Like I think, you know, in Cabernets I probably don't need to do a lot.
So Chardonnays and
Chardonnays,
whites and-
especially if some of those blocks have had a hard time last year.
Yep.
So I think with the rates on that, it's really careful. You don't want to reignite any growth, but you want to hold leaf for as long as you can. So that's where you don't want a lot of powdery mildew running around.
So a little bit of N, but more calcium and
more
boron
calcium and
that
you
sort
know,
of
maybe
stuff.
some seaweeds and some sort of biological products, just to hold leaf and let that vine have a period of producing carbs without a fruit to ripen. So it's that changing of the sink being on the bunch, that disappears now, and let the vine rejuvenate itself without, I think new growth that doesn't have time to fully mature is probably taking from the vine. It's trying to hold that canopy that's just giving back
in
into
good condition
carbs.
to go.
Definitely.
So, very good. Well, I think that wraps us up. So
good to see
thank
you,
you very
Mike.
much, and we'll talk to you after vintage and see how it all looks.
Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.